Okay, everybody, this is our second lecture in week 3. We are now talking about specific methods, not to be confused with the scientific method, which is just an entirely different thing. So we're going to be talking about our methods in general. Then we're going to be talking about the specific methods of the ethnographic method and those associated methods, interviews, surveys, existing sources, experimental methods as a broad category, and then ethics. There are different ways to collect information about a topic. These are our methods, but each method has its own benefits and limitations. Think of the methods as tools. Those are synonyms, right? And you can't fix everything that could go wrong in your house if you only have a pair of pliers. You might need a hammer, you might need a blowtorch, you might need a broom, right? Each of those, similarly, you cannot do all of the social scientific research you might want to do by conducting an experiment. You might want to use ethnographic methods. You might want to conduct interviews. You might want to do something more statistical. So, when beginning a research project, it is important to consider which method will work best for your project. So if you have a nail sticking out, you want to go get that hammer. If you want to understand really macro level phenomena, you probably want to use statistics. The research methods described in this chapter are often applied outside the fields of sociology. I just wanted to state this. So ethnographers, which is a specific type of method, come in all shapes and sizes. They can be anthropologists, they can be sociologists, they can be all kinds of people. They can be English professors. So I just want to state that. There are two general types of methods. We have our quantitative research methods, our qualitative research methods, and then we also have mixed methods. Quantitative research methods translate the social world into numbers that can be studied mathematically. At this historic moment in time, quantitative methods are favored in sociology. We also have qualitative research methods that use non-numeric data such as texts, interviews, photos, and recordings to help us understand social life. So those elements of the social world that we can't turn into numbers, those are qualitative research methods. And then we have mixed methods, which encapsulate basically everything that is a mixture of quantitative and qualitative, and that is a lot of stuff. If this was a methods class, we'd talk about that in great detail. Our first qualitative method we're talking about today are ethnographic methods. One way to collect data through ethnography is by studying people in their own environments in order to understand the meanings give to their activities. So in an ethnography, you may do something like going to a bar and sit in a particular booth for extended periods of time and just write down what's going on around you. I say that's not just a silly thing I'm saying. That was one of the classic examples of ethnography, is actually a guy that went to a bar in Boston and did that. Not just a guy, he was a social scientist. Ethnography usually happens in two steps. First, this is slightly off. First, that should say the researcher observes the social setting. That clarification will be important in a moment. And then the researcher makes the written account of what goes on there. So when you're in the field doing your ethnographic research, you can't really take the copious notes that you would like to in a lot of cases, because people act differently when they know they're being studied. So if you're sitting at that bar stool and like just writing down furiously everything that's happening, people might start to get suspicious. They might think you're a weirdo, or they might just act differently if they know they're being observed. So for that reason, you might like take notes on a napkin or something, try to stay a little bit discreet. But then after you get out of the bar, then you take down your copious notes. That's also a good reason for that specific researcher to not drink too much while he's in the setting, right? Because he might get sloppy and not be able to take his notes later. Then, okay, that's it for that. Sorry. But there is a specific type of ethnography called participant observation. And this is different than just straight ethnography. In participant observation, the researcher both observes and becomes a member of the social setting. So this is a more complex, detailed type of ethnography. So the ethnographer will, instead of just observing people at the bar, he'll get a job at the bar. He will maybe get a job tending bar, and then through that you get a better relationship with the people working at the bar. You get a better understanding of what it's like to have to kick people out of the bar. You might find out what's happening back in the kitchen, right? And you could apply that to almost any social setting. So you get a detailed personal understanding of what's happening in the situation as opposed to just watching the situation. Interviews are another type of qualitative method. So interviews involved direct face-to-face contact with respondents. They are exactly what you would expect, relatively similar to a journalistic interview that you might see on TV or on the internet. Interviews generate large amounts of qualitative data, and when an interviewer is doing her research, she may seek out target populations and then select from a sample of people to be interviewed from the population. These two terms can be used to describe any number of research methods, but let's talk about them here. So your target population is the group, the classification of people in society that you want to study. So let's say I am interested in studying gay men in the city of Chicago, Illinois. That is my target population. And let's say I'm interviewing them. Well, as one researcher, I can't possibly talk to all of the gay men in Chicago, Illinois. That's thousands, maybe tens, or maybe probably tens of thousands, given demographics, tens of thousands of specific individuals. I can't interview all those people. So I need to take a sample of that population. I need to maybe pick 100 of those men to talk to. And that actually would take quite a long time too, to interview 100 people. But that would be my sample. So yeah, those are those two definitions. Interviews can use open-ended questions or close-ended questions. An example of an open-ended question would be something like, tell me about what it was like, using our example of gay males, tell me about what it was like growing up gay in Chicago in the 1980s. That would be an open-ended question. A close-ended question would be, what year, what is the date, your date of birth? That's a close-ended question. A close-ended question has a really simple, short answer. An open-ended question has a broader answer. Open-ended questions let respondents talk as much as they like about the question. Close-ended questions give respondents, they could give respondents a choice of answers. So close-ended questions could be multiple choice, or it could be a simple fill in the blank. For example, it could be, what city were you born in? It could be that too. Another type of research method is the survey. Surveys are typically quantitative. Surveys are questionnaires that are administered to a sample of respondents selected from a target population. They research trends to look at large-scale or macro social patterns and employ statistics and other mathematical means of analysis. So, in all likelihood, you've at least seen people taking surveys. You've probably taken surveys yourself. In the modern era, a lot of people take both scientific and very unscientific surveys on the internet, and those surveys can be used to gather quite a bit of information for a variety of reasons. And most of the analysis that happens with those surveys are quantitative. Existing sources are another quantitative method. Existing sources can refer to any data that has been collected by earlier research and is available for future research. So, for example, the U.S. Census is a great example of an existing source. The census is mandated by the Constitution to happen every 10 years. It says in the Constitution in the United States, we are going to do a quantitative study every 10 years of the people living in our country. And that has actually been an incredibly useful bit of information. Additionally, U.S. censuses, smaller censuses happen every couple years that also are very useful. So the census is a great existing source. Market research data can be another useful source. It can give a lot of data that's been pre-collected. A problem with market research data is that sometimes it can be skewed. So if the Frito-Lay Corporation is gathering information on the demographics of its consumers, that information might leave out tough questions like how much do you weigh, right? If we're studying obesity among people who consume a lot of Frito-Lay products, then Frito-Lay might not necessarily want to share that information with us. That's just an example. So when you get market research data from corporations, it can be skewed because the corporations want to make money first and foremost. Other sociologists are a great example of are a great source of existing sources. This is because a lot of times when we're conducting our research, we gather data that we just can't use and we just can't get to. So instead of letting that data go to waste, a sociologist might bring in, might just give it to a friend of theirs and say, here, use this, please, do this research. I don't want the data to go to waste. So that's a good example. Experiments are another research method. It's a category of methods. It's important to note experiments are not the only way to do science. That's a very common misconception. So you don't call every single scientific thing you're doing an experiment. That's actually a pet peeve of mine. But experiments are defined as formal tests of specific variables and effects that are performed in a setting where all aspects of the situation can be controlled. And experiments are less common in sociology. There are some research facilities where sociologists do specific experimental tests, but they are less common. We tend to favor things like statistical analysis or ethnography or those kinds of data. But if you do want to do an experiment, it must be with an experimental group and it must have a control group. So for example, if you are trying to understand how music might impact people's test-taking abilities, you would have maybe 2 classrooms full of students. In one classroom that is going to be your control group, you would have students take a test with no music. And then in your experimental group, you would have students take a test with music. Then you can compare the control group to the experimental group to see if there was a change. So if everyone in the control group did great on the test and everyone in the experimental group did not so well on the test, you would know that listening to music has or could have a negative impact on test taking. If you found that everyone in the control group and the experimental group both did great on a test and they did very similar, you might, results might be inconclusive or maybe there is no result. Finally, research ethics. The American Sociological Association has developed its own code of ethics to help researchers avoid bias and adhere professional standards to protect respondents from harm. This is largely because in the 1960s and 70s, there were a number of very unethical scientific, sociological, and psychological research studies done. And during this era, the American Sociological Association and the American Psychological Association, they developed codes of ethics to keep that kind of thing from happening again. We don't have time in this class to really look at those studies. If you want to learn more about it, you can do YouTube searches for the Stanford Prison Experiment or the Milgram Experiment to give you really good examples of how those things could go hideously wrong. But we have those codes of ethics to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen again. Additionally, most universities where research is conducted also have institutional review boards. An institutional review board is a group of scholars within a university that meet regularly to review and approve research proposals of their colleagues and make recommendations for how to protect human subjects. Institutional review boards, often called IRBs, are made up not only of people within your own discipline, but of different disciplines. So an IRB for a sociologist might have a chemist on there. It might have a computer scientist on there. It might also have a sociologist on there. And those outside observers are intended to make sure that nobody, to give an outside opinion, to make sure nobody's going to get hurt, to make sure it's an ethical study. Also to make sure that money isn't being wasted, right? Because IRBs are intended to protect universities from wasting money and also to protect them from being sued, which, it's something that needs to be done. So this week, I want you to talk about in the discussion boards, if you were to conduct a sociological research project, what would that look like? And also don't forget to discuss which specific research method you would use and what hypothesis you would like to test. And in that hypothesis, I want it to be very clear what your independent variable and what your dependent variable would be. And then with the research method, how would you use that specific research method tool to talk about your hypothesis. So, and also don't forget quiz 2 to do that. That'll be due by midnight on Wednesday, as will your first discussion post. So, good luck this week. This is relatively dry data, but this discussion of research methods is often very interesting. So I will talk to you later.